So Sussex, we're starting off with Stopham, which is on the west. Obviously, Sussex isn't just one thing. There's West Sussex and there's East Sussex, and this is the country's first protected boundary, protected area. There is a protected designation of origin for English wine, which subdivides into quality English wine and English sparkling wine and quality English sparkling wine. But this is the first regional wine, and English regional wine. Quite right too. So. What is it? We're trying to explore what is it that made Sussex the obvious starting point for this? Was it the obvious starting point? And how has Sussex become such at the heart of the English wine industry? So we're starting off. I think the first thing to say is that Sussex is super, super famous for its sparkling wines. This is where that whole revolution kicked off. But we are obviously not able to do sparkling wines, so we're exploring the still wines. And Stopham are one of the absolute pioneers in Pinot Gris. It so happens that Oz Clarke also thinks that Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc are a really cracking opportunity for our country, and that's sort of good. So yeah, we decided to put a PowerPoint together just because we're tarts, and the we is doing a lot of lifting there. But what's the whole point of this? Why are we trying to come up with this protected thing? And like we said, the sparkling wines are going from strength to strength, beating champagne at their own game, really getting a reputation. And what we were famous for is the traditional champagne method, sparkling wines, right at premium price points and competing with some of the best champagne producers. That is so cool that we can take on people at the absolute top of their game with centuries of history. And the still wines are gaining reputation very, very rapidly. So there's a real desire to protect our brand. Now, when it comes to that sparkling wine, which is what the real gem, the crown jewels they're trying to do, like we said, it's English sparkling wine. The only problem with that is that we're now starting to see a rise in some different methods, like the Prosecco method, Charmat, Pet Nat, which is this funky... How do you describe Pet Nat?
Chucking in a bottle, hoping for the best.
That's harsh. That's harsh. But there's skill to it because it's so easy to make it go badly wrong.
Absolutely. And I think because there is so many that have gone badly wrong, the ones that are good are really, really good. But there's some really, really horrific ones out there. So you've got the good ones for me are few and far between. But when you find good ones, they're really good.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing that, not all sparkling wines are created the same, regardless of where they come from or what grape there is. There's different methods to get your bubbles in there.
Yeah.
So you've got, what's called the traditional method or method champenoise,
the bottle ferment
that you find in champagne, you find in some English fizz, and you find in cava, which is where they do the secondary fermentation in the bottle. You've then got the Charmat method, where they do the secondary fermentation in a big steel tank and then go from there. And then you've got things like carbonation, where they can just literally soda stream it and go from there. But we're not doing sparkling today, so we can move on from that quite quickly.
But it's worth just also mentioning that at the simplest end is carbonation, where you take, for example, as Chapeldown do, and there's nothing wrong with this wine. It's a perfectly good, simple sparkling wine. It's really nice and light. They take some of their Bacchus and they basically put it into the industrial version of a soda stream, and that is fine. It makes a perfectly nice wine. However, if you're trying to protect your brand, you're only really as good as your weakest link, aren't you? So if people are going to go and say, hey, I've got an English sparkling wine, and you're trying to protect it, English sparkling wine meaning the champagne traditional method, having these there sharing the same kind of name is a bit tricky. So there's been a lot of problems. And the real challenge here is that, as Joey and Phoebe are explaining, is that Chapeldown sparkling? Yes. Is it English?
Yes.
Is it wine? Yes. And yet, of course, is it English sparkling wine? Don't be ridiculous. Absolutely not. That makes no sense whatsoever at all. So you've now got some huge producers piling in. There's hoping to get planning approval for a Norman Foster designed winery that's aiming to make 5 million bottles of basically English Prosecco every single year. And that dumping that onto the market is going to make a big difference.
So I just want to dive in very quickly with comments like that, because we've used the term English champagne and English Prosecco, because that kind of it explains the kind of the level, the kind of quality and the style that we might be looking for. What I think is hugely important is we're making great wine in this country. And 15, 20 years ago, English
Oh,
wine
that's
came with a caveat. This is pretty good for an English
Yeah.
wine. A bit like when I lived in DC, that wine from Virginia got that caveat. It goes, oh, this is pretty good for a wine from Virginia. Right now, and what I'm hoping we see today, and I'm not saying everyone's going to love every wine and every style,
Nope.
but these need to be standalone, really good wines, whether it was French or Italian or English or Welsh or whatever it is. Yeah, is this a really good wine? And I think we've got some absolutely outstanding wines here.
I'm loving this.
Regardless
this is really
of where
nice.
it comes from, we need to get away from going, you know, a little tick box and everyone gets bonus points because it's English and it's local. The wine's just got to be really good, and that's what's exciting about this.
Quite right too. So yeah, and like we say, there's a whole range of different wines available from Sussex. But why are they so keen to protect their name? Well, a big part of it is that actually the name Sussex is quite famous around the world now, perhaps largely on the backs of Harry and Meghan, who've been going off shouting out about themselves. And
obviously that's obviously not Harry and
that's
Meghan,
clearly not Harry and Meghan, no, and I don't think South Park would ever dare to sort of suggest that. But that has created a name which is quite sort of well known beyond out of the country, where most other sort of counties are perhaps not. Geographical indications. This is something that's protected in law, and the EU are spectacularly fond of. And they tried to harmonise the way that these are called, because they've got all sorts of different names around the world. And you have this hierarchy. You have a protected geographical indicator, and you have the protected designation of origin. And this is trying to sort of basically mean that you can't sort of call a Meursault unless it's made in Meursault. You can't call it a Roquefort cheese unless it's from that traditional region. You can't call it a Cornish pasty unless it's
I think that's the most important one.
That is indeed the most important one. So this, I thought this was, it's a really interesting point, because you've got stuff like Cornish pasty. They make pasties in Devon. They make them just across the border, and suddenly now they can't call it what they've traditionally called it for years.
And they may well be getting the flour from the same place, the meats from the same farmer, the potatoes from the same farmer in Cornwall. But because it's not produced in Cornwall, it can't be a Cornish pasty. It
can't indeed. And so that's a real challenge for them. But that is the problem with these things, because ultimately, if you're going to protect, it means excluding things. You have to exclude people. And whenever you exclude people from the cool club, it gets controversial. And when you have to draw that line, if you've got a vineyard like Clos de Vougeot, for example, where it's marked out by a wall, that's a fairly natural boundary. Okay, fine. But what if you were to make a wall around the wall? Would the wines inside that other wall be any really different?
Or if the wall fell down?
Or if the wall fell down and you made it in a slightly different place. So it's a little bit arbitrary, but there are more than 360 of these Appellation Contrôlées, Appellation d'Origine Contrôlées in France. It's something which people fight over, and perhaps to the sort of extent where it starts to become a bit meaningless, because it's a bit hard to remember all of these things. It's one thing if you're trying to do it for, a Bordeaux, or another thing if you're trying to do it.
There's an interesting thing of, people who are in it are very excited to be in it.
Yeah.
And the people on the edge. And I think a good example is Marlborough.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no room any more grapes in Marlborough.
No.
And we know how popular Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is right now. You can't get enough of it. The world cannot get enough of it. So there's people going, oh, could we extend, the Marlborough region? And the people outside of that go, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's have more space, because I can then put Marlborough on my wine. And the people inside go, no. Same in Champagne. There's talks about extending, the Champagne region, and the Champagne houses are like, no. No, I'd love to be able to.
And if you expand it too much, like Soave, it just demeans it completely.
Yeah, so it may as well be a wine of France. There's no Italy in Soave, but you know what I'm saying. And you lose that typicity in that place.
So we're talking back to 1756, where the very first protected sort of region came about. And that was, of course, Port, the Douro Valley.
And they stuck all these stones around. You can still see them today. They've got these boundary stones that kind of demarcate where it is.
Yeah. And now if you get to the point where if you go to Italy, you can have a wine of Italy. It could be a sort of a table wine.
Made with whatever you fancy.
Made with whatever you fancy, really. Not very many grapes were grown in Italy. And that's about it. Or at least most of them were. And then you get to your PGI, the Protected Geographical Indicator, and that might be a region like Tuscany. when you get into the PDO, it's got to have a region that is notable for something and has something that binds it all together, like Chianti. And of course, the Italians subdivide this into DOC and DOCG, DOCG allegedly being a bit better. And you can see how, as you go up this pyramid, it gets less and less, and more exclusive.
So yes, a bit better, not always a bit better. More rigorous rules to be able to get that.
I was wondering if anyone was going to mention UGAs. Correct.
Yes,
there are,
11
yes.
UGAs in Chianti because there's not enough to learn to start with.
Yeah,
so
that's
really important.
Let's make it even more complicated.
It's really important to have an area of geographical uniqueness. I think let's add that on with your sub-regions of Chianti and the difference between Chianti Classico Reserve, and the alcohol levels and all that kind of. And yields. Let's
get to the point. Why are
so that's got nothing to do with Sussex, has it? I'm going off on my high horse about more stuff to
You want to protect your brand. You want to protect the brand so that when people pick up a glass of Chianti, they know that it will be a quality wine. It will taste like this, and that's all at the heart of making sure that consumers who are risk averse know that they like what they like. So it's also about raising the quality by trying to stop some of the cost cutting that comes in, because if you can call it a Chianti but you can make it €5 cheaper, then you're probably going to do that.
And you go, well, your yield can only be so many, so many tons per hectare and things like that. That quality yield.
And the idea is that helps keep the price up and helps the producers be a bit more profitable, which is, when I say make more money, I mean, I think for a lot of them, it's making any money at all is a good starting point. So yes, of course, it's all about location. But you can quite clearly see here the type of closure, like the cork, the ripeness of the grapes, the alcohol percentage, how densely the vines are planted, even down to the style of the bottle, but huge number of different factors. And some of these have got this final taste check, particularly South Africa, before they do any export. They insist that this board of people do check the wine and check that it has typicity. It is what you'd expect for that, which of course is very subjective, very, very subjective, but it does help you sort of differentiate these things. Within these things, you have obviously a big trade-off. You've got more liberal ones and you've got more controlled ones. Generally speaking, the liberal ones are bigger, the more controlled ones are smaller. But as you move that way, you get more control, more trustability. The quality is more consistent. You've got to remember, with that exclusivity, which is good, people are now focusing more on the fact that it's a Meursault than it's a, I don't know, particular producer of Meursault. And that is great.
I think that's the thing. You get the DOs or DOCG or AOC that and people will say, I like a good Rioja.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
they have no idea who produced it.
Who made it? I like that style because it's and then you go a little bit further. You say, oh, I like a Crianza because then it's got that. It's got to have that amount of oak, and that's the style.
Yeah,
which makes it safe. But then on the other hand, as you're going to allude to here,
it's
in a tough, in a very hot year when you go, I just want to make this young fruity wine and get it out the door. You can't do that.
No. Or do you know what? I wish that I could
put some 15% Syrah in this to do something, and you're not able to, depending on the location. So
that is and absolutely correct. It just helps people distinguish between things. Sometimes it's arbitrary, but you've got to do this, because otherwise it's just a big blurry mess, and who knows what on earth you should be buying. You've also got the role of history, because if you've got a really well-defined and well-known region, let's say, some of the Rhone ones, and there's a real hundreds of years of history behind this, that is going to guide the rules of the PDO. Whereas if you're Sussex, you're probably hoping that your rules will guide what that identity of that region is known for. So which is it? It's a bit of both, but it depends on kind of how old and prestigious your region is.
Yeah, and how adaptable you are to any level of change. You talk about the Rhone, and there's a lot of winemakers in the Rhone getting a little bit scared. It's getting too hot to grow Syrah consistently and well.
True.
It's ripening too quickly in a lot of places. But there's, in places like Chateauneuf-du-Pape, obviously they've got the option they can blend other things into it.
Right.
But when you've got
talking of Chateauneuf-du-Pape,
it's almost like I knew what was going on.
It's almost like it. So only look, and we're not going to go into the rules of Chateauneuf-du-Pape, but there they are. But what because of that is that when you pick it up, it's going to be rich. complex, powerful. It's going to be a high quality wine. It's not going to be watery or faulty. It's going to be intense and decadent, and you'll recognize it. You would be able to tell if you drink a lot of wine that this is a Châteauneuf-du-Pape. But as you can see, there are those green, blue, light blue, and teal areas which could be literally feet away from vines that are going into Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It's not really that fair on them that they aren't, but sorry, they aren't.
You've got to draw a line.
Them's the rules. You've got to draw the line. Let's bring it back to Sussex now, because why a Sussex PDO? No, that's quite hard to read, so I'm going to make it bigger. But this has all been driven by this producer Rathfinney, and they have created it. He was a student at Plumpton, a financer who did the Bachelor of Science, and he submitted as his thesis this ludicrously over the top a proposal for a Sussex-based winery that could take on champagne, and he put it in, and the initial feedback was, "This is a bit unrealistic, isn't it?" He goes, "No, I'm actually doing it. That's my business plan. That's what I'm doing." So he wanted to make Sussex the kind of the flagship wine of the world, which helps, of course. A lot of his rivals like Nightimber have grapes in Sussex, Hampshire, and Kent, so couldn't be in it. But I'm not saying it was cynical. Is there a quality control plan for Sussex? So yes, as part of this, all Sussex branded wines have to pass this qualitative assessment. So one by Camden BRI and an independent tasting panel. So they've got to score on a whole range of different characteristics, and I think that's a really, really good thing. So yes, Sussex PDO, it is undeniably the centre of the UK wine industry. There are more than 52 wineries now. Of course, it's home to the university there. It's in the south, which means it's warm and also gets moderating factors from the English Channel. And also, they were the first to push this. They were the first to really try to push this forward. So it was more a question of trying to herd cats. When he started this, there were only 18 wineries that were getting involved. And it's been, I think it was 7 years he had to work on it to push it through to become a PDO. So it's been a heck of a lot of work for him. I'm going to quickly show just a minute and a half video that shows a little bit about this. It's very, very simple, but I will let you watch it anyway.
I tend to think of the village of Ditchling as the centre of the English wine industry by weight. It's around halfway between West and East Sussex, and it's a little bit closer to the coast, just like the majority of the vineyards. What started off as a tiny industry saw Nightimber and Ridgeview breaking new ground with their growth of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier to make champagne-style wines. They correctly reasoned that the cooler climates of England were well suited to making the light, low-alcohol base wines with great acidity that go on to make fantastic sparkling wines. Ridgeview lies just to the north of Ditchling and now has a few other vineyards to choose from. About a mile south, you rise up towards the Beacon. Climbing up onto that and onto the chalky South Downs, you find some sensational views out over the countryside, which is now checkered with vineyards. Heading a couple of miles east lies Plumpton College, where most English winemakers learn their trade. This has its own winery, its own research laboratory and vineyards where the students study and practice viticulture and enology. If we look from west to east, we see two real clusters, plus Rathfinney's new vineyards off to the east, right on the downs themselves near Alfriston and the Seven Sisters. But look at how many there are. Seeing this picture, it's incredibly easy to understand how this area with its chalk and sandy soils, picturesque bluebell woodlands and many microclimates caused by the interaction between the English Channel and the hills can make such a brilliant place to grow grapes.
Let's have a look at some of the other questions. So it's pretty close to the sparkling PDO rules. Yes, it is. They go a bit above and beyond. They go for a great deal more. So I think it's 18 months of bottle aging versus 9 months for the English sparkling PDO. And they've got stricter chemical tests they've got to pass. Why did Mark Driver, the owner of Rathfinney, try to do this? And it's quite hard to see, but he says in 10 years' time, you'll walk into a bar or restaurant in Tokyo, Beijing, New York, or Paris, will be asked if you'd like a glass of sparkling champagne or a delicious glass of Sussex. And I can recommend the Rathfinney, he says. And he also said taking into account some of the criticism of, well, this is just a bit of a random boundary to pick a county. He goes, there are some geographical features. There are the marshes over both in Romney and on the east, and on Havant to the west, which kind of blocked off this and provided a kind of a different area before a lot of it was drained in Sussex. I'll get that. But as you can sort of see from the map, it's a kind of a wide, thin county. I think that that geographic thing kind of describes the south bit of it very well, but perhaps not so much the north of it. And, that's where a lot of these vineyards we're visiting today are. And this is, here we can see Ridgeview, obviously. We've got Stopham over to the west, Bluebell's just up northeast of Ditchling and of Plumpton, and Osbrook and Oxney are right over to the east there, with Rathvinny just down very near the Seven Sisters, near Eastbourne. It is a really beautiful place to visit. So that's his view on it. Now, I stuck it up on Twitter, and if anyone wants to see this, they can try to dig it up. But it ranged from some proper abuse like this. This is from Jamie Good, the wine writer. This is utterly silly. It's got to be delineated by a physical site property. You couldn't pick Sussex wines out of a lineup containing Kent and Hampshire. Political boundaries are poor. Use river valleys. Susie Atkins, MW, agreeing. It's great to see there were trailblazers, but the PDOs, silly. What's the point of defining a region which excludes chalk soils but includes non-chalk soils? All good questions. And Emma B, who was working at Bolney, I've seen this as well. You drive down the M23 and the A23. The climate changes so dramatically as you come over the Weald. You just start seeing this sort of this mist settling down on one side of it, and then you've got the downs peeking up over the end. These are totally different subregions. So there's a lot of criticism, but John Atkinson, MW, you've got to start the process somewhere. Otherwise, the alternatives are free for all. That's fairly pragmatic, says Dave Round, MW. Donalde, the sommelier, he would prefer to have more sort of clay soil driven or chalk soil driven things. I think that's a very sensible view myself. Emma B goes back and says it's easier to tell by the winemaker than by the region these days. Kind of agree with that. Joe Fattorini, now I'm going to try to read what he said here. The Sussex PDO is becoming modern wine's filioque controversy. PDOs will always be a theologumenon. Absolutely. Yeah. That's something theological, and it's something to do with whether the Son is included in the Holy Trinity, raising him up to the same level as the Father, apparently. But I think it means it's basically a philosophical, almost religious kind of issue for this. So, yeah, and Mike Best really nicely summed up. I agree with a lot of criticisms. It will be one of those things where we'll look back in 20 years' time and go, thank God we did that. And Mark Driver says 80% of the wine is sparkling. So that's really where the kind of rules were focused. So lots of viewpoints. It's all very tricky. So yes, Kathy, I am very happy to share this slide with you if you'd like to. For the rest of us, don't worry. All that's important is that the Sussex sparkling rules are a lot stricter than the Sussex still rules. You've got a whole range of different grapes you can make it from and still call it Sussex still wine. The standards are a bit more relaxed on that side, but it's definitely a big step above in terms of the ripeness requirements and the aging requirements and everything than the standard English thing. So there is something in there. It's true.
Yeah,
so that's my highly technical.
But, let's talk about clay soil versus chalk soil, or this versus that, climate versus clay. Go to Argentina, go up the Andes, and if anyone was on our high altitude Argentina when we talked with Martin, they dig these pits, and on one side of the pit it's clay, on the other side it's chalk. You go up 100 meters, and it's 20 degrees colder, and that's all in Landacuya. It's all there. So I get why there's got to be some delineation. But
it's all a bit arbitrary.
And I think my best point about we got to start somewhere.
Yep.
And as long as this PDO isn't set in stone till the end of time, and it can be reviewed and it can be updated,
and there can be smaller PDOs that become more concise and meaningful.
Within that,
this is the quality area of it. Yeah.
But you talk about that, we talk about these other regions, and and I'm going to go Argentina again. We used to go Argentinian Malbec,
yeah,
and then we knew about Argentinian Malbec from Mendoza, and then there was Salta, like long way away, and now we're Argentinian Malbec with these sub-regions and then sub-regions. That's where we're going to get to, I think.
Yep, absolutely.
Sussex is a nice start, and then there's maybe a Sussex PDO, a Hampshire PDO, Kent PDO, whatever, and then maybe there's a South Downs PDO which encapsulates all of that.
Boom.
So we then have a geographical PDO that encompasses
matches those bits,
different things, and go, okay, that's that. Napa Valley has sub-regions, and you've got Carneros that goes over Napa and Sonoma at the south of it, because it's got its own. But so if we don't start somewhere.
We've got to start somewhere.
We start with English wine, okay? Free for all for anybody.
Yep.
I just think we've got to be a bit smart with naming.
Agreed.
Like, English sparkling wine is a nightmare because it doesn't help the consumer.
It's just too generic. So, Liz Knight, are other English wine regions now pursuing PDO status? Yes. So, for those of you who've been with us a year, we went to the Crouch Valley in Essex last year. That is a very deep into the process of becoming a PDO, and I fully support that one. I think that's an excellent idea. We didn't really come to much of a conclusion with our little deck. This is not a long part of it. You've been so patient, so tolerant. Thank you. I hope it's been vaguely interesting. But I thought it'd be quite interesting to go, how does the Sussex PDO compare to some of these other ones? Because, in terms of price, it's up there with a premium one like a Chablis. Now, with your Chablis, it's a high quality, it's a familiar name, it's from a village which has got a pretty well-defined boundary around it, which is a small region. And across that small region, not huge differences in the climate. It's going to be Chardonnay, there's not going to be over oat, it's going to be mineral and citrus with good acidity.
And relatively premium.
Yeah. Now, that's my kind of PDO in my head. That's my kind of PDO. And Jamie said, well, what about Navarra? Because that's a whole region of Spain. And that's not quite as prescriptive. So, what makes a Navarra PDO wine?
Well, because it's flat, it's relatively warm, it's got this
influence of the three different
climates, and it's based on an area that's not become a sub-region somewhere else.
But so many different styles within that.
Step up from being a Vina de Mesa.
Yeah.
So it's from a particular place. So. But I think that kind of shows, where you can go. You go into Burgundy and you can say
Van de Bourgogne,
Van de Bourgogne, or you can say Côte de Beaune, or you can pick a particular vineyard.
Yeah.
And it really depends how far you want to go down the rabbit hole and how precise you want to be. So I think Sussex PDO is a good starting point. Is it perfect? No. But I think it sets good grounds for English wine, for other regions to go for a PDO status and kind of take their learnings from it and be able to pick and choose and go, that's
there are
cool.
definitely lessons to be learned. There was a committee effect that happened. You can't exclude Reichensteiner because I've got a whole field full of Reichensteiner. So yes,
and everyone needs to grow, and everyone's got to grow together and learn together.
Yeah.
But and I'm not anti-Reichensteiner when I say this. If we work out from this that Reichensteiner for 10 years' time isn't what the Sussex PDO is about, that has to get written out.
Somebody mentioned Will Davenport's wines and his Huxelraber. I thought I'd just buy a bottle of it on a punt. It was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. So you cannot make these rules. But in general, PDOs are really useful for helping both the wine region get its own identity and the consumer pick something off a shelf. Nothing's perfect and there are different shapes and sizes. It's only when you get to that smaller size that you can be super prescriptive.
Can we go to Sophia's point?
Sophia's point.
The title of the PDO. And I think this is the point. We started with Sussex.
Yes.
And then within that, we'll start getting a
Sussex South Downs National Park, or
if we go that small, we'll go that
the Clay of the Weald or the Thames Valley chalk or lots of different geographical things.
If it gets rewritten and there's no reason why different PDOs can't overlap slightly because something's based on soil and something's based on there's no reason you can't do that. You can't have the sub AVAs, you've got something like you take California, like Alexander Valley, it's kind of weird because it kind of is in Sonoma, but also in Napa at the same time, and vineyards vineyards stretch over, different boundary lines, and you go, this is here and there. What is it? It's on the, the Napa side, the Sonoma side. It's on that side,
Well, ironically, the one part of the wine GB classification of the world that makes an awful lot of sense as a PDO is Thames Valley and Chilterns. I think that's a valley, and it's these.
You've got the ridge, and you can go anything that's in the rain shadow.
Yeah, quite right.
Like the
rain shadow.
Well, Thames Valley's the ridge and then the basin, isn't it?
Quite right, and we're going to need.
But there's no reason
they
you can have that
doing
cruise
amazing
style, or you
things.
could always go in that. We could yabber for hours about this. And I realise we're running.
Yeah.
You could almost have
You're
that
doing too
almost like
badly.
that Spanish pago system. That's like, okay, you don't fit into this, and so you are your own little vineyard here, and you're a pago. That's what it is. And I think it's going to be little bit by little bit, but we've got to make sure that we don't stifle experimentation. We don't stifle development, because we've not been doing this,
especially in the young industry.
we've not been doing this as long as a lot of the countries with these ingrained systems.
No.
And you look at, we're putting a system in because we want to do quality wines.
Yeah.
A lot of places put these systems in because of people making just really shitty wines and breaking rules and putting antifreeze in things and pretending things weren't what they were and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's many people in that
Algerian
in the UK.
wine in Burgundy.
I don't think people are bringing a bunch of French Bordeaux in and blending it into their stuff. So I don't think we've got that worry.
No. But I think all of these things.
We don't have too many. From what I know in this industry, we don't have too many unscrupulous winemakers in the UK. We've got people who really want to push this forward. So we need to work together, make sure it works for as many people as it possibly can. And it's got to make it easy for the consumer.
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything I have to say, English sparkling wine cannot be the phrase for a traditional method English sparkling wine made with this and this and this.
And there have been so many arguments about this. What do you call it? So there's this famous person, Christopher Merritt, who wrote down before old Don Perignon did.
To be fair, that name has merit.
Name has merit. So people were talking about whether it was called merit method
or
something like
do you
this.
want to give people the option of wine of the night?
I could do, yes. I'll give people the option of wine of the night. But what they've come up with is the Great British Classic Method, which is not frankly any better.
That
rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
So the old GBCM.
This is what the Night Timbers are now trying to push, and look, it's another step above English sparkling and English quality sparkling wine. And there's a nice, pretty logo. I quite like the logo. It doesn't have to be a word that because if you look at Chianti, people recognise the symbol,
the Gallinero.
Indeed, the bird. So will that work? I don't know. I don't know at all. This has been super fun. I don't know. What do you think?
I think this is a very weird one for wine of the night, isn't it? Because it's not like we've done a flight of 6 Chardonnays and go, well, Chardonnay.
What the hell do you go for?
I think what this shows is if we are going to have a Sussex PDO, okay?
Yeah.
How do you include all these?
Well, that's a very good point.
And say this is Sussex style.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and absolutely, and it's frustrating that both Merlot and Chasselas are not in the PDO, so those ones are not able to be put into the PDO.
But can you still call it a wine from Sussex? You just can't write Sussex PDO.
You can certainly put the address on as it's from Sussex. So all of these say on the front of it, single estate. Grown and bottled by Oxney Organic Estate, Hobbs Lane, Beckley, Rye, East Sussex, UK. But it doesn't say wine of Sussex. It says, in fact, wine of England on it. So
labelling's got to be a bit clearer.
Labelling's got to be a bit clearer. But it does bring on to the point of a slightly embarrassing thing.
None of these wines.
Not a single one of these wines is actually labelled wine of Sussex.
So that's the end of the PDO discussion.
But you will find it if you want to try a glass of Sussex. Go out, have a glass of the Rathfinny, have a glass of the Ridgeview, have a glass of the Oxney Sparklings. They're fantastic. Have a Hindley. They really are worthwhile, and especially with the Coronation weekend.
Get down there, get drinking it, and I'll tell you the best way to drink a glass of this wine or a bottle of this wine is to go and sit in the vineyards and meet the people and see what it's all about and go from there.
Shall we look at what the results are?
Let's have a little look. See.
Oh my gosh! Okay. Wow! That is a resounding win, and not Goodness me,
That's
not what I
not
was
what I would have
expecting
thought.
at all.
I would have thought.
Okay.
My thoughts were going to be Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Yep, it's not. By a landslide, it is the rosé, which also was John Mobbs of Great British Wines Wine of the Month as well. It is a sensational rosé, and yeah, it is. It's an absolutely sensational rosé. But what is quite interesting is how tight, or most of the others are. We've got incredibly the narrowest margin. Second places was the Pinot Gris, which I think is excellent.
And then
excellent
everything else is kind of tight.
Super tight, super tight. So we won't go into that breakdown because it's not enough of a difference to really differentiate them. But what I will say is I should put the prices up, shouldn't I?
You should.
Remembered it for once. And what you see there, and I think if we were to run this again, $16.95 for that Stop and Pinot Gris. I think that is an absolute bargain. Some fabulous wines, some real surprises, and some delights tonight, and a wonderful audience. So we've greatly enjoyed it. Thank you very much for telling us what you'd like to know about why you come along to this, and it's pretty much tied between learning about wine and entertainment, which is great to know.
And if you'd like a copy of Alex's slideshow, please let me know, so I don't have to deal with him making another one ever again. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great night.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Cheers. Bye.